Hi Flosstube, it's Helen D. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how I got my stitching onto a spool. I did a separate video about how I measured the spool to figure out what would fit, and this video is the actual how I finished it onto the spool. We'll talk about the stuff I'm using first. This chart, the first one I did, this is from Threadwork Primitives on Etsy. It's called Uncle Sam. And the one we're going to finish today is also from Threadwork Primitives. It's called Be Merry. I adjusted mine a little. It said Be Merry down here, and I left that off just so it could be out. I think I had a heart. I just wanted a plain snowman. And then the other one I will probably talk about is this one, which is The Witch is In, and this is by The Witchy Stitcher. So when I stitched this piece to finish on a spool, I hadn't done one before. I kind of winged it. It worked fine. Since then, I've played around a little bit and come up with a different way that I personally like better. The main difference is on this one, I stitched everything down, and on the next version, I just ironed things down. So it's actually a little quicker. So the other difference is on my original one, I decided to just use what I had, which was an interfacing. This is Pellon 950F. It's a fusible interfacing. It's a little thicker. It's the one I like to use for project bags, so it's the one I just happen to have. But then I thought, I wonder how fusible fleece would work, because when this was on my spool, it just looked a little, I don't know, wimpy. It just looked like it needed a little something. So for this piece, this was my experiment piece, I used the fusible fleece, and I used a different method of putting the edges down, and I thought it came out great, and it has a little more substance to it. So that's what we'll be doing. So set that one aside. So the spool that I'm using, this is one that I know a lot of people bought. This particular spool came from Milling Around Maine on Etsy. It's a vintage spool. I think it was out of a mill in Massachusetts. It says Massachusetts here on the end. When I'm filming this video, he still has some of these available. What he has is what he has, right? Because they're vintage. It's not like he's making them. So you can check his Etsy site. I will list it below, but he may run out of these. But in the measuring tutorial, I showed you how you could measure to fit whatever size spool you're able to find. This just happens to be the one I'm using. So what I did to figure out how big my finish needed to be is I started by, and I'm always using this, abnormally large ruler, to measure this space between the knobs, and it's about 5.5 inches. And I don't want it quite all the way up to 5.5. Like this one is 5.25. So 5.5 is my max. So now I'm going to measure my stitched piece. I should say this piece happened to be on a 16 count Aida, because when I did my measuring to see what would fit, stitch count wise, that's what would fit. So this ended up being about just over 4.5. So if I went 5.25 inches, that would be perfect. So to measure around the spool, I pulled out one of the retractables, and the max that it would be 5 inches. So I thought I will cut a piece of fusible fleece 5.25 by 5 and then adjust as needed. I have a scrap, so I think it will be the right size. Well, we'll need some trimming, but I think we can make it work. So this is 7 by 5.25. So we'll do the 5.25 side, and I know this is a straight edge because I just cut it off something else. So if we come up here, I'll have to go this way. I'm going to come up here to roughly 5.25. Normally I would use my full-size board, but that won't fit. good thing about this finish is, if it's not exactly perfect because of the dimensionalness of it, you can't tell. So now that's about 5 1/4. So then on the other side, we'll go 5 inches. Let me turn this. Which is right here on my line. Hold up, that's my 5 1/4. I gotta turn this around. 5 1/4 to 5. So, this is my 5 1/4 side. Five and a quarter. Sorry, I'm getting turned around. All right, 5 1/4 this way. I'm just going to lay this on my spool. 5 1/4 is pretty much exactly what we need, but the 5 inches going around is too big. I want to make there be a little bit of a gap because I like to finish this with just the zigzag and some buttons so that it's something I can take off and stitch something else to put on, because these spools can be hard to find and I want to be able to reuse it a number of times. So I'm going to come in here and probably cut off a 1/2 inch, and then we'll measure again and see what I think of that. So with a 1/2 inch off, that's pretty good. It's about right. This all depends on what you like. If you want it a tight finish, if you want a little more spool showing, I'm going to stick with about 5 1/2. Sorry, cutting off a 1/2. It's not 5 1/2, it's now 4 1/2. So now what I'm going to do, the fusible fleece is fusible on one side and not the other. So I'm going to come in, and the way that I'm going to kind of iron it on and measure it is I just took a regular pencil. I would have used a friction pen, but they've all ended up in my son's backpack, so I don't have any. And I'm going to come in here, and this is just about 4 1/2. So I know that if I make a mark at about 2 1/4, that's the center. I'm going to make center marks on all 4 sides. So this side is 5 1/4, so 2 1/2 and 1/8. Am I the only one that does it that way? That way I have that measured with just little marks. And now I'm going to come in and do the same thing. I have ironed this, so I'm going to flip it over to the back, and I'm not cutting it yet. I'm going to measure the width of my stitching, which is 2 inches, so 1 inch, and I'll kind of make this mark up high. It will probably get cut off. That's fine. It's fine if it does, it's fine if it doesn't. So 2 inches, 1 inch, and then the other way, just over 4 1/2. So 2 1/4 and a 1/16. And I made these, again, kind of a ways out, so that when I put the interfacing on there, I can still see them. So now when I go into my ironing board, I have my interfacing. I can line, goes this way. You do have to kind of pay attention, because I almost went this way thinking, oh yeah, but then it was longer, my stitching was longer. So remember which way you're going. I want the tall way. So now I can come in and line those marks up. I don't know how well you can see that. So then when I iron it, that will center my interfacing right on here for the next step of the finishing. So I'm gonna pause and go iron. I do put a piece of scrap fabric on top when I iron the fleece because it's not double-sided, but my iron tends to want to stick to that. So just heads up, I'll be right back. Back from the iron. Kind of missed that corner, but that's okay. I'll get it the next time. So as you can see, I ironed it to match up all my lines. So now I can flip it over and just kind of fold right over that piece of interfacing and just kind of finger press it down to see how I did. And it's more so about the top and bottom of the design that this matters. So it's pretty well lined up. So then again, check it, make sure it's going to fit. That's going to be great. So the thing that I did different, like I said on this one, is this one I just folded it up. Pardon this string. That's the last step. And I just sewed. I think I skipped 2 squares and then did a stitch, and skipped 2 and then did a stitch, and it took a while. It's completely doable. It just took a little time. For the next time I did one with the wedge, I wanted to try something different, and I got some Pellon Lite EZ-Steam II, which is like a double-sided hem tape, basically. It's a fusible tape. I got it at Joann's. I used my coupon. It was not expensive in the least. So you can pick this up there. I'm sure a lot of craft stores have it. The nice thing about this is it's kind of double-sided. It's double-sided, but it's a little sticky, which helps when I'm trying to do the actual placement. Mine is a 1/2 inch. It says right on the package, 1/2 inch. So I'm now going to come around and I want to make sure I have at least a 1/2 inch to cover the tape. So I'm going to cut about 3/4 of an inch from the edge of my interfacing. I didn't have much on here because I like to keep things tight. So 3/4 of an inch on all 4 sides. What we're working with now. So this tape, like I said, it's got a little sticky. So I'm going to come in. I like to have it finished with my edges. These are the ones that will go around. I kind of want their flap, if this makes sense, to be in so that this edge is clean. See how that edge is clean and the extra fabric is on the top. So in order to do that, it means I need to fold the top down and iron it first, and then the edges in. So I have this so that I'll do the top and bottom first. So this tape just comes along. I'm going to stick it right to the edge of my fusible fleece on the top and bottom and just cut a little piece off. And like I said, it's fusible, but it has just a little sticky in it so that you can really get your placement on there nice. So this is the worst part, is peeling this top off. I kind of pinch it with one fingernail to get that tape, and then I can pull it off. Okay, so now I can just fold this up, and because it's got that sticky, I can test it before I iron, which is nice. And the 3/4 of an inch was perfect for folding and covering that tape, right? There's really not much left over. So now I can flip this over and see, am I way off? Am I way crooked? in my about even, which this one is. I'm going to check it again to see how that's going to line up. That's going to look good. So now I'll go in and iron that down. Okay, we're all ironed down. Now we just need to repeat this step on the other side. One thing I am going to do first is just cut out a little of this extra fabric. It just makes it a little easier to kind of maneuver. So I don't want to cut it like a straight triangle because then sometimes it frays on the edge. So I'm going to kind of leave see how there's still a little flap there, and then I just kind of diagonaled some of this extra fabric out. Just so it gives us a little less. So now I'll come along and do the same thing. This time I'm going to put it right to the edge, my tape. And this does peel off if you made a mistake. It's pretty forgiving. And this one roll is going to last me a long time. I think it's 20 yards. Okay. Now again, try and peel these edges off, this tape stuff off. There we go. So now when I'm folding them over, I'm just kind of really making sure that this edge kind of gets down in there. I don't want anything sticking out. This part also, right on the tops, we sew a button on there, so it kind of gets covered, which is nice if it's not perfect. Like I said, if it's not perfect, no one really sees the back. I'm just kind of pulling it down a little and then folding it over, going about halfway, and then doing the other edge. Okay, then like I said, I can flip it over and see, am I way off? Is there a way bumpy spot? Or does it look good enough to me? One more time, check it on the spool. That's about how much of a gap I'll have, which for me is perfect. Again, you could adjust if you want it more or less. So now I will go iron those down. All right, I ironed those down. One last step before we sew the buttons on. If you have some little bits like this that are kind of sticking up through, you can carefully come in and just snip those off, those little edges, if you want to. The buttons kind of do cover things, but if you want to just kind of neaten it up a little bit, feel free. So then you could sew this right onto your spool if you didn't intend on swapping it out for other things. Because, like I said, I knew this might be the only spool I ever get like this. I wanted to be able to swap out a seasonal design. I chose this Threadwork Primitives chart because she has a whole series of them, and I liked the look of them and they fit perfect, so that's why I chose that. So for the buttons, be as creative as you want. For this one, I just used white. I would have used red, white, and blue, but I didn't have any. For the witch, I found some gold, some green and black, and I kind of alternated. So for this snowman, I went through my button stash and I found these little snowflake buttons. So I'm gonna line up, I couldn't find 6 the same. I have 2 different styles. So if I line up 3 on each side, I just want to make sure there's no like bulgy gaps, right? I want to make sure that I have enough buttons that it holds it on there tight. For the witch, because it was a longer design, I used 5. So I'm going to do 3 of these buttons on each side. You can measure, you can wing it, you can do whatever you like. I'm going to wing it. I'm going to do 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom, and then just eyeball the one in the middle. And then once those are sewn on, I can come over to the other side and just kind of eyeball line them up. So I happen to have some sulky thread that was the same color as my blue. You can use whatever you like. It's just sewing buttons on. And I'm going to come in and just make sure my button is fully on the fabric. Decide which way I want my holes and then just go with that. And I'm just going to tack this on. Sometimes I find this part takes the longest of anything else. I can't get that through there. So I'm going to sew 1 on and then I will pause and sew the rest of them on. I'm not a very speedy button sewer. So I'm just going to go through it like 2 or 3 times. This isn't a button that I'm going to be using, right? So I just got to make sure it stays on there. Get on there. I cut 1 long piece of thread so that then after I finish 1 button I can knot it off and then just keep going. So I'm just going to do 2, then I'm going to come in on the back, go under my fabric a little to make a loop, pull all that through so I have my loop, and then I can just go through that to make a knot. And I might do that twice and then I'll be done. So I'm going to keep going and sew on all 6 buttons, and then we'll be back for the very last step. Okay, all of my buttons are on. I did go through and just snipped off these little edges of my thread so that I wouldn't have anything that would be sticking out. And now I just need to attach that on. So for Uncle Sam, I used just a piece of sulky, just a little small strand. For the witch, I used all 6 strands of a piece of DMC. So you can kind of use whatever you have. For this one, I thought I would try, I have some baker's twine. So for my measurement, I'm just going to kind of double this up so that it's just a little longer than what my piece is. That should be all we need. Cut that off. So now, for the sulky, I tied a knot and pulled it up behind one of my buttons so that it's on there permanently. The baker's twine was too thick. So that's what all these scraps are from. I tried that. It didn't work. So I'm just going to lay this on there, wrap it around, take one edge of my baker's twine, and kind of hold one edge under my thumb and wrap it around this button just once, just to hold it in place. I gotta watch out for this button because it's got the... So now that's attached on there. So now I can hold it on and just start zigzagging. I'm gonna go under my bottom snowflake. And I'm just going to lace this up through my snowflakes. Once it's on there, it stays put. Come up to my top. Come across. Cross again. I can kind of twist them to get them to line up. And then down to the one I started in, and again I'll go around it an extra time to kind of lock it in place. And that's it. Now I can just cut this off. So you can cut that off a little neater if you're trying to hide them. It was easier, I found, with the sulky and the DMC. Like, you can kind of tell down there on the bottom, but you need a little bit of it sticking out so you can unwind it. The baker's twine was a little thick, so I may redo this and just use some DMC or a piece of sulky if you don't want this piece to show. Like I said, you can kind of hide them under there as best you can. But if you don't want them to show, use a thinner thread, and then it winds right on and you don't really notice it. So I can kind of adjust if he's uneven, right? You can pull him up, you can twist him around a little bit, but there is our spool finish. And then when the time comes, I can just unwind and put the new season on and be ready for display. And what I like about these is they're thick. They stand up completely on their own. I don't need to balance it on anything. So there you have it. I hope that helped. I will list everything down below, like the interfacing and the fusible fleece and all the stuff that I used. So I hope that helped everyone, and I can't wait to see all of your spool finishes.